My name is Kaylee, and throughout this video I'll tell you all about what life was like on Doggerland. I'm going to tell you about the different animal and human species that lived on this now lost landmass and what we know about their ways of life. This video is in collaboration with Miniminuteman, and you'll hear him later in the video tell you all about how Doggerland disappeared. During the Pleistocene, 98% of the botanical species that are present today were already in existence, as well as many other insect species and butterflies. Which I think is quite nice to know that the plants, the insects and the butterflies that I've seen during my lifetime here in North Holland were already in existence more than 2 million years ago, and were the same as the other human species roaming the landscape of Doggerland would have encountered as well. It makes me form a strong connection that I feel between myself and the long extinct ancient human species that once called this area of Europe home. Well, maybe they didn't really call it home in those exact words, but I am of the opinion that the feeling of home is something that both animals and humans can experience. So it's not weird to think that these ancient, now long extinct human species used to call this area home in the sense of they felt like it was home. So let's take a look at some of the remnants from the Doggerland landscape that we can see today in modern times. A landscape that went all the way from modern day the west coast of the Netherlands to the modern day east coast of England. Near where I grew up is a place called Schorl. This location has a beautiful pine forest that mixes together with the sand of the dunes. These pine trees were planted about 100 years ago, but the trees used to roam this area naturally for thousands of years. This area was once an Atlantic dune forest. But unfortunately, the trees were cut down over the centuries, leaving behind large sandy plains. As you can imagine, sandy plains are not a great defense against the water of the North Sea during storms. And knowing that this area of the Netherlands is situated a couple meters below sea level, this was a bit of an issue. So the decision was made to reinstate the Atlantic dune forest, and the same species of pine trees and also oaks, birches and rowans were thus planted about 100 years ago. Pine trees hold the sand with their roots, preventing it from blowing away, and they evaporate a lot of water. What's fascinating is that Schorl in the Netherlands is located at a latitude of 52.7 and Norfolk in England is located at a latitude of 52.6. The reason why this is fascinating has to do with the fact that here in Norfolk we can see the remnants of the other side of this ancient Atlantic dune forest. The coastline of Norfolk has the same pine, oak, birch and rowan trees that grow through and near the sandy dunes, showing to us that long ago, during the time when Doggerland was still a landmass, a massive forest with sandy plains stretched from the modern-day coast of the Netherlands to the modern-day coast of Norfolk in England. This type of forest is actually very common along the Atlantic coast of England. The characteristics of this particular ecosystem is the salt spray that the often strong wind constantly brings with it. That salt spray and the wind ensure that the upper parts of the branches often break off, which causes trees to grow in more width, which explains their irregular shapes. Of course, it's unclear when the Atlantic dune forest first came to be, but it's safe to bet that this occurred before Doggerland sank beneath the waves. The forest most likely changed over time due to the salt spray, but because we can clearly see two distinct locations on both sides of the North Sea at nearly the same latitude, it's not a big stretch to think that there used to be a very large forest spanning from North Holland in the Netherlands to Norfolk in England. Doggerland was home to a lot of animal species, large megafauna as well as a multitude of human species. About 3 million years ago, mammoths dispersed into Eurasia through the Sinai Peninsula. The earliest mammoths in Eurasia are thought to be the species of Mammuthus rumanus. Eventually, because, evolution is a thing, Mammuthus meridionalis emerged, which is a descendant species of Mammuthus rumanus. Mammuthus meridionalis is often referred to as the southern mammoth, which is a lot easier to pronounce, so I'm gonna keep pronouncing it like that. And this species lived between 2.5 million years ago until approximately 800,000 years ago in Eurasia and Europe. And then 1.7 million years ago, a new species of mammoth emerged in Eastern Asia by the name of Mammuthus trogonteri. But this species is better known as the steppe mammoth. Again, a lot easier to pronounce, so it's going to be the steppe mammoth from now on. This species crossed the Bering Land Bridge into North America and is the ancestral species of Mammuthus columbi, better known as the Columbian mammoth. Around 1 million years ago, some of the steppe mammoth population migrated into Europe and slowly replaced the southern mammoth in this area. The steppe mammoth populations that remained in Siberia eventually gave rise to yet a new species of mammoth. This is the most famous known mammoth species, Mammuthus primigenius, otherwise known as the woolly mammoth, around 800,000 years ago. The woolly mammoth roamed all over Eurasia and eventually replaced the steppe mammoth in Europe completely around 200,000 years ago. The woolly mammoth also migrated into North America during the late Pleistocene. The reason as to why woolly mammoths are so famous is because they are often depicted in cave paintings during the Ice Age. In fact, it's the third most depicted animal from this time after horses and bison. More than 500 depictions of woolly mammoths are known today. Think of depictions like cave paintings and engravings on the walls of caves, but many sculptures and engravings were also created from ivory, antler, stone, and bone. Woolly mammoth bones were also used as construction material for shelters by Neanderthals and modern humans during the Ice Age. I actually covered this in a video a couple months ago. Highly recommend watching that. The woolly mammoth was perfectly adapted to the cold. They had a very thick coat of fur. The outer coat consisted of long coarse guard hair and underneath a dense inner coat of slightly curly underwool. The reason we know this is because some mammoth fur has been preserved over time, and of course, as you can imagine, this fur has been researched quite extensively. Woolly mammoths had lipopexia, which is the storage of fat located in their necks and in their withers, so they would be able to survive when food availability was scarce during winter. Just like the reindeers, the hemoglobin of the woolly mammoth was adapted to the cold, with 3 mutations to improve oxygen delivery around the body and prevent freezing. Now here's a fun fact for y'all. Some woolly mammoths suffered from spondylitis, which is the inflammation of the vertebrae. This is what I suffer from as well with my ankylosing spondylitis. Look at me and the woolly mammoth suffering from the same fun disease. Yay! The woolly mammoth lived in a tundra steppe. This environment stretched from northern Asia, many parts of Europe, and the northern part of North America. Then, around 9,650 years ago, the woolly mammoth went extinct in Eurasia, although the species continued to live for a few more thousand years on St. Paul Island in Alaska and Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean. Yeah, woolly mammoths actually still roamed Wrangel Island when the pyramids were being built. They roamed the landscape that was once Doggerland, just like woolly rhinoceros who lived in northern Eurasia from 130,000 years ago until approximately 10,000 years ago. The woolly rhinoceros lived in dry to arid climates, in the lowlands, the plateaus and the river valleys, but they would migrate to higher elevations in favorable climate phases. The woolly rhinoceros lived alongside the woolly mammoths in the area of Doggerland as well. Another species that used to live in the area of Doggerland are cave bears. They lived throughout Doggerland and the rest of Europe, Asia, and even northern Iran between 1.6 million years ago and went extinct around 24,000 years ago. Cave bears have not been found to have inhabited Scandinavia, the northern British Isles, or the Baltic countries because these areas were all covered in extensive glaciers during the time they roamed the Earth. Then we have Eurasian cave lions who inhabited Eurasia and North America from 700,000 years ago until it went extinct 13,000 years ago. The cave lion, also known as Panthera spelaea, was an important apex predator and a prominent member of the tundra steppe environment. I wouldn't want to encounter one of them. because I know I would die very quickly. I like cats, so probably I would try and pet one and then die. From evidence, we know that Neanderthals and modern humans interacted with this species, as they've also been depicted in ancient artwork. Saber-toothed cats from the Homotherini tribe also lived in Europe, Asia, Africa, North America, and South America as well. The first species of these felines emerged around 23 million years ago, and the last species went extinct around 12,000 years ago. Again, I would probably try and pet a saber-toothed cat, because again, it's a here kitty kitty. These saber-toothed cats had smaller upper canines than those of, for instance, the saber-toothed tiger, better known as Smilodon. The saber-toothed cats in Eurasia lived on the tundra steppe. They would hunt young mammoths and other large prey. Although they had to be very careful with their saber tooth, because if that got stuck, it would break off and then they wouldn't be able to hunt again, so they would probably die. Not fun times for them. Around 770,000 years ago, the first steppe bison appeared in eastern Eurasia, eventually dispersing all the way from Western Europe to eventually North America. The steppe bison is one of the most depicted animals in Ice Age art, most notably in the caves of Altamira in Spain and Lascaux in France. The steppe bison seem to have gone extinct between 1130 and 10,060 BCE. And then there's the lowland wisent, also known as the European wood bison. The species was hunted to extinction in the wild in the early 20th century. But thankfully, they were kept alive in captivity and have been returned to the wild by captive breeding programs. There are several thousand European wood bison in the wild nowadays. Conservation and preservation and all that jazz, it's really very important. We brought back a species on the brink of extinction. There are bison fossils of unclarified species found on Doggerland. So far, we've not been able to determine which bison species these fossils belong to. Hopefully, that will happen in the future. Then around 770,000 years ago, the Eurasian auroch emerged in Asia, which migrated west and north during warm interglacial periods. The oldest known auroch fossil in Europe dates to 230,000 years ago. Mitochondrial DNA analysis showed that aurochs and the steppe bison interbred around 120,000 years ago. The European wood bison contains up to 10% aurochs ancestry. Like what? Aurochs were one of the food sources of early humans and may have been one of the first domesticated species by modern humans in the Fertile Crescent. Yeah, that's the area of like southeastern Turkey, Syria, Iran, Iraq, you know, the Fertile Crescent. During the Pleistocene, the Irish elk, also known as the giant deer, emerged and started to inhabit Eurasia. Their habitat ranged from Ireland all the way to Lake Baikal in Siberia. They lived in the boreal steppe woodland environments, and they did not inhabit the tundra steppe environment. This means that during the cold spells, they would migrate away from the northern regions of Eurasia, and during the warm spells, they would migrate back north. So during the Bulling-Ellerud interstadial, the Irish elk recolonized northern Europe, the area of Doggerland, with abundant remains in the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Denmark. But during or after the Younger Dryas, they disappeared from northern Europe completely. Eventually, they went completely extinct, with the last survivors of the species inhabiting Western Siberia and European Russia around 7,600 years ago. The first species of reindeer in Europe dates back from the Middle Pleistocene period. Its European range was extensive, supplying a major food source for prehistoric humans in Europe. Reindeer were originally located in Scandinavia, Eastern Europe, Russia, Mongolia, and northern China. But they would roam the open tundra and taiga being the boreal forest. But reindeer during the late Pleistocene lived as far south as Spain in Europe and as far west as Ireland. Wild horses have been present in Europe since the Pleistocene as well, and ranged from Spain in the south, Great Britain in the west, all the way to central Russia. Evidence suggests that these wild horses lived in most parts of the Holocene in continental Europe and the Eurasian steppe, except for parts of Scandinavia, Iceland, and Ireland. There's a lot of ancient art that depicts these wild horses, like for instance in the cave of Altamira in Spain and the Lascaux cave in France. Humans hunted wild horses since the Paleolithic because horse meat was most likely a very important source of protein for these ancient people. And then there's the European wild ass, which is a sort of donkey species. I didn't come up with that name. European wild ass honestly sounds really super wrong, but the species' official name is Equus hydruntinus. This is an extinct species from the Middle Pleistocene to the late Holocene of Europe and West Asia. While the European wild ass is extinct, there are some of its sister species, so to speak, still present in Africa, Asia, and Iran. But the European wild ass, really, they're extinct. The European wild ass lived from the Middle East to Europe, reaching possibly as far west as the British Isles. Them Brits did like themselves some wild ass. Moving on. A lot of smaller animals, now extinct, used to roam the landscape of Doggerland as well. Like for instance the now extinct steppe pika, the Tyrrhenian vole, the narrow-headed vole, the sand-kildam house mouse, and a squirrel species named Spermophilus superciliosus, to name a few. Again, I didn't come up with these names, they're a bit weird. The first human species to inhabit Europe and the area of Doggerland is Homo antecessor. You may have thought that Homo heidelbergensis would have been the first species of humans to live in Europe, but no. Homo antecessor predates Homo heidelbergensis by a couple 100,000 years. I've actually made videos on all human species mentioned in this video and even a lot more. It's in my hominin playlist here on YouTube. Homo antecessor got its name from being the pioneer species of Europe, the early settlers or explorers, if you will. Homo antecessor emerged somewhere around 1.2 million years ago, and they seem to have disappeared off the face of the earth around 780,000 years ago. While Homo heidelbergensis emerged around 800,000 years ago and disappeared somewhere around 200,000 years ago. Fossilized remains of both Homo antecessor and Homo heidelbergensis have been found at the Grandolina cave at the Atapuerca archaeological site in the province of Burgos in the north of Spain. But wait, Kaylee, what the hell? What the fudge? The north of Spain was not connected to Doggerland, so how can you be sure that they lived in the area that was once Doggerland? Like, bitch, please. Well, I can easily explain why. On the northeast coast of Norfolk at Hasbro, fossilized human footprints have been found. These footprints are dated to be at least 800,000 years old. These footprints are the oldest human footprints discovered outside of Africa. They most likely belong to the pioneer man, that's better known under the name of Homo antecessor. But there is a small chance that these footprints may have belonged to Homo heidelbergensis. Bones, flint tools, and other plant and animal remains have been discovered in the area of Norfolk during excavations as well. Among these was a molar from a southern mammoth, a species of mammoth that went extinct around 800,000 years ago. Homo antecessor had quite the unique combination of modern and archaic features in its morphology, which makes them distinctly different from the other species in the Homo genus. Homo antecessor is sometimes thought to be a late Homo erectus or a very early Homo heidelbergensis. On this, I cannot give you any conclusive statements, as it is not my place to theorize on human species belonging to a genus or a species. But as of this point in time, Homo antecessor is seen as a distinct separate species. So that's why I've covered it here as a distinct separate species. It is suggested that Homo antecessor was a nomadic species that mostly followed their food source and that they did not live permanently at caves but rather visited these caves at certain times of the year, possibly for certain activities. This makes it all seem very plausible that Homo antecessor would have roamed the landscape of Doggerland as their food sources may have taken them there. Another fun fact that I'd like to share with y'all: Homo antecessor is believed to have dabbled in a little bit of cannibalism. Not a very fun thing to do, but I'm guessing that they must have been very desperate. There are fossilized human remains found in the Grandolina cave at Atapuerca in the northern region of Spain that show cut marks and fracturing, which is indicative of cannibalism and are quite an obvious sign of butchering. It seems that the bodies of the dead were very efficiently utilized by the remaining living. Ribs bearing cut marks along the muscle attachments, which is consistent with defleshing. That's a word I didn't expect myself to say, defleshing. Oh. It seems that the meatier areas of the body were prepared and eaten, and the rest of the body was smashed and discarded. It could be that under dire circumstances, they had to butcher their own for nutritional purposes and survival. There's actually also some evidence of significant cut marks on the skulls of some specimens, more than they have found on the animal skulls, and this could be evidence pointing to exocannibalism, which is a form of ritual cannibalism where they eat an individual belonging to a different tribe or social group, like an eat your enemy kind of thing. It does seem like the individuals that were eventually eaten died of natural causes and were eaten to not let anything go to waste. Dire times ask for dire measures, it seems. There's no evidence that shows that they were killed to be eaten. As I mentioned earlier, Homo antecessor vanished from the face of the earth around 780,000 years ago, and they were not the only human species inhabiting Doggerland. Like I mentioned earlier, a new species started roaming the landscape of Doggerland when Homo antecessor still existed, and this species is Homo heidelbergensis. This species was named after the location where the first remains of the species were found, near the town of Heidelberg in the state of Baden-Württemberg in the country of Germany. The very first bone of Homo heidelbergensis was found all the way back in 1907. Over time, more fossils of Homo heidelbergensis were found all over Europe and Africa. In 1971, fossilized remains of Homo heidelbergensis were found at the Arago caves in Toutavel, France. These remains have been dated to 400,000 years ago and 250,000 years ago. Fossilized remains of at least 30 Homo heidelbergensis individuals have been discovered at the Grandolina cave archaeological site of Atapuerca in Spain. Although there is some controversy about the classification of these bones, because some anthropologists suggest that these bones belong to Homo antecessor, or even Homo erectus, as there are markings of cannibalism found on these bones. But the features are similar to that of Homo heidelbergensis fossils that have been discovered in other places as well. This actually does give weight to the theory that Homo heidelbergensis is a direct descendant from Homo antecessor, who is a direct descendant from Homo erectus. And this gives weight to the idea that Homo neanderthalensis, the Neanderthals, are a direct descendant from Homo heidelbergensis, which is also modern humans' own ancestor. And Homo heidelbergensis might be the common ancestor of the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, and us, modern humans. While Homo heidelbergensis emerged around 800,000 years ago, there is little to no evidence of them roaming in Europe before 600,000 years ago. By 500,000 years ago, they were already spread out in Europe and possibly even South Asia. Homo heidelbergensis inhabited the British Isles possibly as early as 620,000 years ago, as archaeological discoveries made on the outskirts in Canterbury in Kent, England, have been dated to between 620,000 and 560,000 years ago. A leg bone and 2 teeth discovered at Boxgrove in West Sussex belonged to a Homo heidelbergensis individual, dating back to at least 480,000 years ago. The early Homo heidelbergensis created Acheulean stone tools, mostly bifacial stone hand axes, cleavers, and carvers. Later populations of heidelbergensis created tools from deer antlers, bone, and wood, modifying their tools into scrapers, hammers, and wooden throwing spears. It is believed that Homo heidelbergensis wore some type of clothes, especially in areas of Europe that have a colder climate. Unfortunately, as you can imagine, clothes degrade a lot faster over time, leaving little to no trace, so we don't have any clear tangible evidence for this. But it's safe to assume they at least created something from the animal hides to keep them warm, mostly because we have found scrapers in their toolkits. Scrapers that would have been used to scrape these hides and prepare them for the creation of shelters and clothing items. In fact, The discoveries made in Canterbury, England, gives tantalizing evidence hinting at some of the earliest hide processing in European prehistory. So we know that Homo heidelbergensis hunted large animals for food. Think of animals like mammoths, rhinos, hippos, bears, horses, and deer. And these animals seem to have been hunted with quite a level of skills and then butchered in a quite organized fashion, which suggests that Homo heidelbergensis worked in groups. In fact, Homo heidelbergensis seem to have evolved into quite the adept spear makers. The Clacton spearhead, dating back to approximately 400,000 years ago, was most likely created by a Homo heidelbergensis individual. And it is thought that the oldest discovered wooden throwing spears, known as the Schöningen spears, belong to Homo heidelbergensis as well. These spears were discovered in an open-cast lignite mine in Schöningen in the Helmstedt district of Germany. These spears date to somewhere between 424,000 and 300,000 years ago. The deposit directly below where the spears were found has been dated by the use of thermoluminescence dating, and it was dated to be between 337,000 and 300,000 years old. But of course, it is very possible that the spears were in use before they were deposited here, so therefore their age is quite unknown. Unfortunately, no hominin remains have been discovered near the spears, which makes it impossible to know for certain which species crafted and used these wooden weapons. But the most likely candidates for this are Homo heidelbergensis and Homo neanderthalensis, otherwise known as the Neanderthals, or Neanderthals, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Homo heidelbergensis seem to have shared the lands they roamed in Europe with another human species by 400,000 years ago. The first traces of the use of fire in Europe can be found dating as far back as 400,000 years ago. These traces have been found at, for instance, fireplaces in Beech's Pit in East Anglia and Menes Dragan in Bretagne. Fire brought with it a whole new way of life. Not only did it bring warmth, protection, and a new array of edible food with the possibility of cooking, it brought light after the sun went down, and it must have strengthened social bonds, stimulated communication, and languages. Neanderthals emerged around 430,000 years ago, and by 400,000 years ago they started roaming the European and Asian lands. Around 32,000 years ago, the last Neanderthals seem to have disappeared from the face of the planet. Neanderthals were a sophisticated human species that have been portrayed wrongly as dumb brutes and cave dwellers for a very long time. Neanderthals are known to have inhabited the British Isles as early as 400,000 years ago. There are 5 known locations of Neanderthal sites in England, Wales, and the Channel Island, Jersey. Creswell Crags and Swanscombe National Park are the most famous of these 5 sites. At Swanscombe, a geological site in northwest Kent in England, the remains of a young woman were found dating back to 400,000 years ago and has been identified as either a pre-Neanderthal or Homo heidelbergensis. Remains of animals discovered at Swanscombe showed signs of butchery by hominins. At the Creswell Crags, which is an enclosed limestone gorge on the border between Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire in England, it was discovered that Neanderthals lived there around 60,000 years ago. Around 250,000 years ago, Neanderthals arrived near Maastricht, in the valley of the Maas River, in the southeast of the Netherlands. Yay, my country finally! Artifacts found here are made from flint, and it's discovered they lived here in small encampments. Go Dutch Neanderthals! Neanderthals roamed the landscape of Europe, although the population size of Neanderthals never got as large as that of us modern humans. Unfortunately, Neanderthals lived in a high-stress environment, resulting in about 80% of them dying before the age of 40. If I was a Neanderthal at nearly 33, I would be panicking, because I know I would be dying very quickly. The oldest fossil of a Neanderthal in the Netherlands was discovered in Zeeland in 2001. A shell sucker off the coast had picked it up, and eventually it was discovered by amateur paleontologists who look for artifacts in the heaps of collected materials on land. It was discovered to be a skull fragment from a Neanderthal man living between 100,000 and 40,000 years ago. The man got the nickname Krijn. In the fragment, there is a hollow mark near the eyebrow arch, which was created by a subcutaneous tumor. Yeah, unfortunately, Neanderthals also suffered from cancer. I've actually made a video on how old cancer is, and you're not gonna like it. Neanderthals were a sophisticated species, just like us modern humans. They had stone tools, bone tools, and they created ornaments from bones just like their modern human counterparts did at the same time. And they created necklaces from eagle talons as well. Neanderthals were on top of the food chain in Europe for quite a long time, and they weren't brutes as they were wrongfully portrayed for so long. But in reality, they were really intelligent. Neanderthals were inventive and intelligent enough to create a glue from birch bark. An incredible find of a flint tool with a piece of birch pitch glued to it was discovered at the Zandmotor Beach in the Netherlands in 2016. This tool dates from approximately 50,000 years ago and is a perfect example of the ingenuity of Neanderthals and one of the most incredible finds ever made in the Netherlands, as there are only 5 similar finds discovered in the entirety of Europe. New studies on stone tools suggest that Neanderthals had the technology to spark fires. They used a flint and pyrite fire-making system, and in some cases, pyrite on pyrite. And it almost sounds like I'm saying pirate, but it's pyrite. There have been multiple pieces of pyrite found from the Upper Paleolithic that showed traces of fire making by the striking method. Did I just say pirate or pyrite? But because of the phenomenon known as pyrite decay, most if not almost all pieces of pyrite that were used for fire making have disintegrated over time. Around 54,000 years ago, the first Homo sapiens started to settle in Europe, in the area of modern-day southern France. By 47,500 years ago, they started to settle in northern Europe. Homo sapiens fossils discovered at the Ilsenhöhle cave at the foothills of the Thuringian Mountains in Germany were radiocarbon dated to 47,500 years ago. As a modern-day descendant of the ancient Germanic tribes from the Thuringia area, this is especially exciting for me personally. My last name is Düring. It is derived from the ancient Germanic Thuringi tribe. So it's incredible to know that Thuringia is one of the oldest locations where modern humans started to roam in Northern Europe. Radiocarbon dating revealed to us that modern humans started to inhabit Northern Europe a few thousand years earlier than previously thought. After all this time and all these other species roaming the lands of Doggerland, our ancestors had finally arrived on Doggerland, leaving many traces behind. They must have come in contact with Neanderthals, as Neanderthals were still known to live in Northern Europe around this time. In fact, the Neanderthals living in the area of the Netherlands and Germany around 45,000 years ago are often referred to as the leaf tip group. These were the last Neanderthals in northwestern Europe, characterized by their leaf tip tools that were constructed partially bifacial. It is thought that this particular group of Neanderthals started creating their tools in this fashion due to the influence of modern humans that started to settle in the area. DNA analysis from a 40,000-year-old jawbone revealed that Neanderthals and modern humans interbred in Europe, showing us clear evidence of Neanderthals and humans coexisting. And doing a little more than that, I mean, maybe those Europeans had some wild ass? Around 41,000 years ago, Homo sapiens, us modern humans, first started to roam the British Isles. The modern humans, however, only stayed in the Doggerland area for a short period of time, because it became too cold. Around 32,000 years ago, the last full Neanderthals went extinct. But Neanderthals never fully disappeared off the face of the earth, as Neanderthal Homo sapien hybrids continue to live on, as is evident by the Neanderthal DNA carried in our modern-day genomes. I actually carry about 2% Neanderthal. During the last glacial maximum in the Weichselian, some 33,000 years ago, an ice sheet once again started to cover the North Sea. Around 26,500 years ago, this ice sheet covered most of the British Isles, Scandinavia, and parts of Northern Europe, as you can see here. The climate in northwestern Europe most likely became too cold and uninhabitable for humans during this time, and there are no traces of humans living here found between 27,000 and 14,500 years ago. After 12,000 years without a trace of human occupation in northwestern Europe, it was the start of the Bulling-Ellerod warming that shows the first signs of humans occupying the area again. The people responsible for the incredible cave art in Spain and France are known as the Magdalenian cultures. They started to permanently settle in the area that we now know as Doggerland and Northern Europe. The Hamburg culture and the Creswellian culture are related to the Magdalenian cultures, and they settled in the areas of North and Mid Netherlands, North Germany, Denmark, the south of Sweden, Poland, and the UK. This warm period lasted approximately 2,000 years, and during this time, Doggerland flourished, and temperatures were almost as high as the temperatures we currently experience. In northern Germany, the hunter-gatherers hunting the moose in this time period are referred to as the moose hunters, although they are most well known under the name of the Federmesser culture. This culture is characterized by their flint arrowheads that look like thin quill knives. These knives are found all over, from the United Kingdom in the west to Ukraine in the east and northern France in the south. The diversity of the sites where the artifacts are found show to us that humans settled in shorter and longer occupied encampments. They've discovered numerous small encampments where flint tools were created. The Federmesser culture was very mobile, but returned to specific places during the different seasons. In February of 2004, bones were fished up along the Brown Ridge in the North Sea. Among these was a metatarsal bone from an auroch or bison that had incredibly intricate carvings on it. It was thought that it would have been an artifact from the Mesolithic era, but radiocarbon dating concluded that this piece had to have been created during the Bulling-Ellerod interstadial, approximately between 13,480 and 13,285 years ago. You can clearly see the V-shaped decorations that have been carved on the bone fragment. This is a beautiful piece that shows that the Federmesser culture was highly skilled. They lived in prosperity in the Doggerland area with temperatures similar to today's climate. Unfortunately, their luck was short-lived. In the tundra-like environment of the Younger Dryas, we see a new group of nomadic hunter-gatherers emerge, the Arendsburg culture. Many bows and arrows can be found all over Denmark and Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, the north of France, and the east of England. Researchers have suggested that the higher grounds of the Ardennes in Belgium would have most likely been the place for the people to settle during the summers, and the low-lying countries including Doggerland would have been the winter hunting grounds. Rivers were most likely the most important routes for these people to migrate between the summer and winter grounds. The hunter-gatherers in the area seemed to flourish after the Younger Dryas ended near the coasts, where they would hunt seals, shellfish, and whales would wash ashore at times. They also flourished in the extended wetlands, where there was an abundance of swans, geese, migratory birds, pike, eel, and sturgeon. They would create canoes and paddles from linden trees that grew in the area. Willow trees and red dogwood trees were perfect for the weaving of traps, while reed was perfect to use as ground and roof cover for their huts. Here on screen you can see an example of such a canoe. This is the canoe Van Pesse, which might very well be the oldest boat discovered in the entire world. This canoe has been dated to have been constructed between 8040 and 7510 BCE. It measures 298 centimeters long and 44 centimeters wide, and it was cut out a single piece of red pine log. Marks from flint or antler tools are still present in the cavity of the boat today. It was discovered in 1955 during the construction of the Dutch A28 motorway, A28. As they were digging to remove the peat bog, a crane operator discovered the canoe. After Doggerland and Doggerbank were covered by the waters of the North Sea, life in northwestern Europe started to change. The Mesolithic inhabitants of Scandinavia, Great Britain, and the Netherlands stopped living a nomadic steppe lifestyle, as there was no need for them to keep traveling from one place to another during the changes of the seasons. They still traveled in small groups, but shorter distances, as their surroundings were filled with forests and rivers with great biodiversity. Their tools started to change as well. They started to create smaller and more refined flint knives, arrows, and spearheads. A real eye-opener into the lives of these Mesolithic inhabitants was discovered in 1997 by the discovery of 2 encampments in the higher dunes in a swampy area of Hardingsveld in the Netherlands. These encampments are incredibly well preserved due to the quick deposit of peat and clay, making the conditions excellent for preservation. These encampments date from between 5500 and 5000 BCE. In one of these encampments, archaeologists discovered the oldest animal burial in the Netherlands, the burial of a dog named Treintje. It was a treasure trove of artifacts as well. Tools made from bone, wood, and antlers, paddles, a bow, and a 5.5 meter long canoe made from linden wood were discovered, as well as pieces of traps and fish nets. Most Mesolithic artifacts in the Netherlands are discovered along the coast. While there have been some artifacts found in North Holland, most artifacts are found in South Holland. Yeah, Holland is not the same as the Netherlands, it's a part of the Netherlands. It's only 2 provinces and the Netherlands has 12 provinces in total. These Mesolithic people in the Netherlands eventually made way for the funnel beaker culture, a Neolithic culture who eventually created the Dutch dolmens around 5300 BCE from the glacial erratics that were deposited throughout the landscape in the east. I've actually made a video about 2 of the 54 Dutch dolmen located in the province of Drenthe that you can find on my channel.
Yo, how's it going everybody? My name is Milo Rossi. Got my wool pants on today. Some of you may already know who I am, but in the off chance that you don't, I am an archaeologist, environmental scientist, and science communicator here on YouTube. And the reason I find myself here in Kaylee's video is to tell you a little bit about the catastrophic downfall of Doggerland. You see, this was all done as a collaboration, and I made my video about Doggerland mostly about the environment and why it existed in the first place. And so I think I am the perfect guy to tell you about this. If I had to give one concrete answer of the thing that killed Doggerland, it would be sea level rise. In geologic time, the sea level rise happened at an astonishing speed, but it would have been almost imperceptible on the scale of a human lifetime. There would have been a few brief periods where the hunter-gatherers around Doggerland would have noticed sea level rise in their lifetime. For example, when Lake Agassiz in North America drained all at once about 8,200 years ago, which resulted in the sea level around Doggerland rising about a foot over the course of about a year. This is obviously far from the apocalyptic scale Atlantean deluge that some may claim it was, but still would have been enough to drastically alter the lives of the people who once called this place home. But the thing I want to tell you about today is something that's a little bit closer to an actual apocalyptic deluge, because it is theorized that one of the contributing factors to the death of Doggerland was a cataclysmic tsunami. Around 8,200 years ago, near the same time as the lake draining in North America, another event took place. A colossal submarine landslide moving between 600 and 800 cubic miles of sea floor. It occurred off the coast of Norway and is one of the largest submarine landslides that we have any record of. Now, I don't think you need me to explain to you that this would have been an absolutely massive event, and this enormous displacement of land beneath the water created a huge tsunami. Now, since it was off of the Norwegian coast, much of the brunt of this tsunami likely went out into the open sea. But even though it may not have been in the direct path, Doggerland was not spared. Geologic evidence in Scotland suggests that the tsunami wave that hit there was between 10 and 17 feet, and there's even evidence that the coast of Denmark was impacted. At this time, about 8,200 years ago, Doggerland would have been on its last legs. It mostly consisted of the Dogger Bank Island and a slightly wider low-lying coastline of most of the British Isles in continental Europe. And it was at this moment of vulnerability that it was hit by the Storegga tsunami. The force would have been devastating. As this wave barreled towards Doggerland, it would have been forced up onto the shallow seafloor of the North Sea, meaning that more of that wave energy would have been channeled into the land. While estimates vary on just how much this would have impacted the people of Doggerland, it is likely that it would have been a catastrophic event. Archaeological and geological evidence suggests that the Dogger Bank was hit the hardest. At the time, it formed a barrier island out to sea, and would have been directly in the path of the tsunami. Any hunter-gatherer groups who called this area home would have been absolutely devastated. What makes matters worse for those that relied on whatever was left of the Doggerland ecosystem was that they probably clung to the coastal areas, with the coastal and low-lying ecosystems being much more productive and rich in food. And with almost no warning, they were likely directly in the path of the tsunami. More liberal estimates have speculated that this event could have contributed to the death of 1/4 of the North Sea coast population. While this event would have been absolutely devastating in the short term, it likely wasn't really the nail in the coffin for Doggerland. Since it was a tsunami, all of that water eventually would have just washed back out to sea, meaning that this wasn't an Atlantis-style water suddenly rises and never goes back down. But it would have been a devastating blow to any of the people that once called this area home, likely irreversibly changing the coastlines and shifting populations away from these low-lying areas. I think that the geography and biology of Doggerland is absolutely fascinating, and thanks to the work of many diligent scientists, we actually have a phenomenal chronology of what Doggerland was like through almost all of its existence. And if you want to learn a little bit more about that, well, you can come check out my video. While Kaylee's focused a bit more on the archaeological human side of things, mine focused a bit more on the environmental and geologic side of things. Anyway, that's going to do it for my little cameo appearance here, but I'd like to thank you all for watching Kaylee's video. If you are a viewer of mine, make sure to give her a subscription. And if you're a viewer of hers, you should come check out what I do, because it's like this, except it's me. So that's fun. Thanks, Kaylee. It's been a blast.
Doggerland may have disappeared, but it hasn't been forgotten. In all actuality, it's slowly gaining more popularity and attention as the years go by. Fishermen keep finding fossils in their nets, and a research boat goes out to sea regularly to investigate and research the submerged ancient landscape of Doggerland. On a daily basis, people will scour the beaches in the Netherlands as they search for remnants of this lost land, and I'm sure the same is done in England, Denmark, and other places. All these finds have been incredibly important to the research and understanding of the ancient world and the inhabitants of Doggerland. This Doggerland book is one of my most prized possessions because it makes me feel connected to the ancient inhabitants of a landmass that no longer exists in modern times. Unfortunately, this is the Dutch version, but you can get yourself the English version as well. Doggerland is teaching us that the world as we know it is only temporary. The borders, the countries, the coastlines, and our way of living will forever keep changing. We are part of the ecosystem on this floating sphere in space. We might be at the top of the food chain for now, but that leaves us with the responsibility to do and to be better for future generations and the future of this planet. Doggerland was a place that our ancestors once called home. Maybe not by those words, but it would have felt like home to them. And its legacy will live on as we keep researching and covering its rich history. Doggerland. It may be gone, but it's never truly forgotten. So what do you think about life on Doggerland? Let me know in the comments down below. Have you made sure that you've watched Miniminuteman's video on Doggerland yet? Then go ahead and check that out if you haven't. Link to that in the description down below as well. If you enjoyed watching, then don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to see more of these kind of videos, and click that bell icon if you want to be notified whenever I upload. If you haven't seen my previous videos yet, then click the card in the upper right corner, or click one of the links in the description down below, or click a video in the end card. I would also like to say a massive thank you to all my patrons and my channel members. Thank you so much for supporting me throughout these years. It's been 4.5 years since I made my very first video, and I'm excited to see what the next 4.5 years will bring to me. With that said, I'll see you in the next video. Bye!